we find that the Romans owed the conquest of the world to no other cause than continual military training, exact observance of discipline in their camps, and unwearied cultivation of the other arts of war. The year is 50 CE. Rome is a third of the way into the era known as the Pax Romana, a 200-year period of inner peace within the empire, which stretches from present-day Syria in the east, Egypt in the south, to the far west, where the Mare Nostrum, what the Romans called the Mediterranean, met the Atlantic, which they called Mare Tenebrosum, or Sea of Darkness. It was here that Britannia lay, and decidedly large parts of it had not yet submitted to the concept of Pax Romana. Caesar had failed in conquering these lands, but the Emperor Claudius and his generals did not. Your name is Gaius Regulus, and you had left your home in Salernum to join the Roman Legion. As a new recruit, you were sent to join Legio II Augusta in Gallia. Your legion, along with 9 Hispana, 14 Gemina, and 20 Valeria Victrix, in addition to over 20,000 auxiliary troops, crossed the waters from Gaul into Britannia. While the leadership were aware of Britannia's role in trade and had concocted a reason to invade based loosely on restoring Verica as king of the Atrebates, for the common Roman soldier, it was a mystical place, and the men almost revolted. However, cross you did, and on the other side, you engaged in many battles and adventures on your march across Britannia's southern shores, including time spent digging into a mine and then out of it after it had collapsed, receiving reward for saving many men. Under your legatus Vespasian, you conquered to the farthest southwest reaches of these lands, subjugating the hostile Durotriges and Dumnoni tribes who resided there. You were surprised that these tribes, along with those already encountered, were far from the savages you'd previously pictured. While they didn't have the full Roman-type construction that you grew up in, they did mint coins, and they lived otherwise similar lives. The extent of their civilized ways, however, would soon give way, as your legio would traverse beyond the borders of the Dobuni, the Silures. Who lay beyond this were a tribe that would test you in ways you were not then yet prepared for. Much has happened in the intervening years between your arriving in Britannia at the end of the events in Part 3. The winds of change blowing strong. 4 years after your arrival, Aulus Plautius, no longer governor of Britannia, replaced by a man named Publius Ostorius Scapula. Your Legio II Augusta, stationed at Caleva Atrebatum, had received word of the need to engage them. And this is where your story resumes. You are now 27, having spent the last 5 years with Legio II at a camp outside of Caleva Atrebatum, which was now already beginning to resemble a Roman town. Other small temporary camps had been set up for temporary stays, but none large enough for full camps as the one at Caleva. It would over the years envelop the original Brittonic town and would grow into a large Roman one with the typical grid layout and include most of the amenities that Roman towns were known for. A few of its buildings would last even until early Anglo-Saxon times. Your camp lies just outside of town and structured in the typical field fashion, albeit with a bit more permanence. Preparations are clearly underway as moving west has been the talk of the camp for weeks now. Your contubernalis and you have grown closer since the death of Maxus those years ago. Atticus, who hails from south of Rome, is an ox of a man approaching 30. He comes from a long line of butchers and would often assist with the killing and cutting of animals for the Legio when meat was served. He was also extremely protective of you and the others, but with a very dark attitude, which included seeing death around each and every corner. Marcus and Cyprian, both farming stock, and much stronger than their appearance would suggest. They were also continually homesick for the rolling hills of their native Etruria in Italia, which lay further north of Rome. Cornelius and Lucius were as opposite as could be, Cornelius almost a head taller than everyone but Atticus, being roughly his height. But being also close friends with Lucius, who only just was admitted height-wise, was comical any time the two walked anywhere as a pair, which happened often. Cyprian was roughly your height, neither too tall nor too short, and as with you, blended in nicely on marches, but was fascinated with everything related to nature. Trees especially. They would fascinate him endlessly, trees that, other than their ability to cast shade, never provided you with much else to think about. For Cyprian, though, who could drone on and on about their various shades, heights, bark textures, in truth it seemed everything about them fascinated him. Then there were the plants and shrubs. He treated Britannia as a playground of possibility, and out of all of you was most looking forward to the march west. This left but Quintus, who'd come to replace Maxus, and as a result was harassed quite a bit early on in mostly good-natured ways. But that, of course, was from the point of view of those hurling it. Perhaps Quintus would not have agreed. But if this was the case, he certainly had not led on. By now, though, he was an integral part of your contubernium, as much as any of the others. Each would gladly cover for the others at the risk of punishment for minor infractions, although this tended to not happen frequently, as the legio was what mattered most to all of you. Excursions into the town on formal matters, though, well, they may have drifted into more entertainment than formal function on occasions. When not training and working at the various tasks assigned you, you spent your precious free time with your latest few obsessions, one of them the obsession of La Trunculi, which you shared with Cyprian. The others, though, mainly played tally and tesserae, which they played with dice. In between the making of tiles or road building for the town with clay, chalk, and gravel, you've been working on your second obsession, learning to craft bow and arrow. You were in absolute awe of how Vespasian had utilized the inclusion of this weapon in ways you'd certainly not considered. Cyprian showing you the best wood to use for both arrow and bow, and Atticus providing you with the sinew. Enough that you've stockpiled a few bowstrings worth. The day came when your centurion mustered yours and the other contubernium under his charge. His name was Justus, and he was primus pilus, or senior centurion of your first cohort, a cohort that you'd been moved to after the mine incident. He wore an even more detailed silvered version of the centurion armor, and he was in his late 30s with not a libra of fat on his muscled body. His calves hung from his legs like two large chicken breasts, and his arms capable of lifting most men off the ground and assumingly also being able to crush the life out of them while doing so. From a distance, some might describe him as handsome. Upon closer inspection, his face was a map of his life in the Legio. Burns from a long-ago campaign covered parts of the left side of his face, and on both sides scars that were numerous and extended up and over his scalp, as well as down his back and right arm. What else was hidden by his clothing could only be surmised and better replaced by happier thoughts. He was, as most centurions, a disciplinarian, but compared to some of the others in the Legio, about as fair as they come. He led through action, inspiration, and example, whereas many of the others relied almost exclusively on fear. However, he would not suffer fools or cowards. He would generally address you as the head of your contubernium when speaking to you and the men, and seemed to have a confidence in you that extended beyond your service, likely due to your past and present actions, both of which he was fully aware of. It was rumored that before coming to Augusta, he had fought on the borders of Germania in the Battle of Baduhenna Wood as a member of the famed 5th Legion. and was one of its fiercest fighters, responsible for pushing the enemy back and saving many cohorts and cavalry. Years later, and just a few before joining Augusta, it was said that he had even raided against the Chatti and was part of the legio that recovered the 3rd legionary standard lost in the battle at Teutoburg. Regardless, he had the respect and obedience of all the contubernalis, optio, and centurions under him.
Men, our legio begins the march after Maine. We face the Silures, who have been launching raids into the lands we have civilized and we have brought peace to. They have been beaten, but their territory remains untamed, and they are a danger to the other tribes and to Rome. They will be shown no mercy, no quarter, and they will learn what it means to go up against the might of our legio. We march at full pace, and I've been told my men will be carrying half of the sudis for camp construction. Gather your things and be ready to march at the sounds.
Soon the march began, as did the singing of your marching songs, like Urbani, which featured the exploits of Julius Caesar and the politics of his time. You were wearing one of the new types of armor that most in the first cohort were wearing, while the rest mostly still wore the typical male shirts. The new armor was called Lorica Segmentata, and it hailed from the famed smiths in Gaul. The march to the territory of the Silures would take 5 days. The 5 centurions under Justus and their 5 optios were rigid in their devotion to Justus and the legio. To march alongside them was an honor. Vespasian had personally ensured each of the men who had been moved into these positions during his time were battle-hardened and experienced in all senses worthy of the position, and not through the familial connections in Rome, as so many others had been. Even the legatus Titus was a campaign veteran of almost 3 decades. It was on the evening of the 5th day, though, that things would change. You'd been marching southwesterly into the Silures territory, which was wooded in great portions with low-rolling hills on all sides, giving away only occasionally to open, flat, tall-grass fields. As the woods gave way to one of these grass plains atop a hillside where you would camp, the attacks began. At first, they were hit-and-run attacks against the contingents of light armed auxiliary infantry and cavalry which had scouted ahead. You'd been marching 6 abreast, but when the attacks began, the centurions and optios barked to move into battle-ready positions. Then, Hades itself descended upon the area. Seemingly aware of your presence for several days, the attacks intensified on all sides. Word spread that a large portion of the front auxiliary and cavalry had charged the Silures on chariots, attacking them, but had not returned. Leaving the legio likely on impulse, they would no longer be a priority. The priority was now the legio, and in a defensive formation on all sides with scutums raised. Then the full waves of attacks began. Your 6,000 men being attacked by a force at least 8 times as large. The Silures, like many of the other Brittonic tribes, rode war chariots. Theirs, though, were smaller and mobile, meant for their lands, and they could drive at fast speeds through even the lightly wooded areas like this. On the reins, a warrior driving the 2 horses, with another man on the back throwing spears, all clad in blood red, even the chariot. They looked as bringers of death, and the wind instruments that they used in the background complemented the eerie howls of their war cries. Driving about in all directions, hurling their weapons, seeking to break your ranks, some leaping off with chariots at a distance after having expended their spears and now joining their infantry with sword and shield and charge. An hour into the fight, word that several of the other cohorts had been slaughtered, but Justus remained, as did the legate, barking orders through the ranks to hold firm and to hold fast. And here we end part 4. I want to thank you for watching. If you like this video and are looking forward to the sequel, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet but like this channel, please consider subscribing. Love to have you on board. And with that, as I always say, till the next video, cheers.